Excellent. We're rolling. Shane, it's a pleasure to be chatting with you on behalf of Reality Sandwich. I consider you a trailblazer in the psychedelic space. You're furthering the conversation with your roadshow and just the work you've been doing over the past decade. Could you give me and our audience, though, a quick log line of who you are and where you're at right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess if you read my Instagram bio, it will clearly just state trailblazer, generally, not just in the realm of psychedelics, but just an overall trailblazer. No, I'm actually, and we're recording video that we may or may not be using, and now I'm in a grain mill right now. I'm in an Airbnb in a grain mill in Lincoln, Nebraska, where I have a show tonight at this lovely little theater, because I'm on the road with my show, A Better Trip, which is a psychedelic comedy show with sprinkles of a TED Talk in it, I guess I would say. I guess I'm a stand-up comedian first and foremost, according to my accountant. And I started stand-up in 2004 and caught some breaks early on in my career, back when like late night and those sorts of things were still a thing that people cared about, and was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to get to headline and tour all around the country and world very, very early in my career. It was a dream of mine since the age of 10. So maybe something to do with the writing and prep that I had done, but also clearly some good fortune. And then I got into the I started traveling internationally. I started seeing that internationally there's like these festivals where people would do solo shows and things, and compared to doing a regular stand-up punch sort of thing, I would people were doing like these whole themed things, and so then I started thinking about what a theme should be. That led me to eventually starting a science podcast, as I was emailing scientists for asking them questions on some sciencey themed shows that I was putting together. Put together some science themed shows that I toured with for a while and did various projects with. And then that, in a weird roundabout way that we can get into, got me into doing psychedelic comedy shows and in the psychedelic space as well. So all of that is to say, in case you had the good sense to just edit all of that out, and start right here. I'm a stand-up comedian who kind of fancies themselves a little bit of a science communicator. At least I'm very passionate about interviewing scientists as often as I can. I have a science podcast, and I somehow along the way put psychedelics in the mix with all of that, and then I'm a psychedelic advocate as well.
Super rad. Well, I think it's amazing that you're opening up the conversation. I think just now psychedelics are coming into their own and speaking with scientists and people in the culture. It's great that you're furthering the conversation here.
I mean, look at this. I'm in this grain mill, right, in Lincoln, Nebraska, where there was on Airbnb, there was multiple choices around the city of various grain mill Airbnbs to stay in. I treated myself and kind of got the fancy. and behind me here, there you see this? There's this old tin cigarette sign commercial for Viceroy filter tip cigarettes. And this is a very, very wholesome place. I'm in a residency where, we come in and there's like the baby Jesus and everything out, because this is being recorded in early December. There's the whole there's the whole scene in the front yard, and which is one of the things I love, getting an Airbnb with like a I like to walk into a place and see an inappropriate number of crucifixes around in the Airbnb. Oh yeah, like a real salt of the earth book. And so anyhow, I bring all this up because this is like, these are very wholesome people who own this Airbnb, and they have this, fun old timey cigarette thing. That's how normalized something like cigarettes was back in that time. And so to have lived my entire life seeing all of the stigma around psychedelics, and to see something like cigarettes, which I myself have gotten myself addicted to at various points in my life, still be kind of such a normalized thing is such a strange world.
Well, everything's in moderation, right? The tobacco leaf is a plant medicine, right? Just part of the spectrum from mushrooms to depending on which plant you want to, intake.
Absolutely, yeah. Sorry, tobacco. No offense to tobacco, but certainly the way in which it got processed in our modern culture and advertised and used through, in kind of the madman era, where we're still recovering from the kind of Joe Camel phases. But yeah, I'll don't. Hey, I'm not turning down your mupacho if that's what you're offering me here. I'll do some hape from time to time. Sure.
As on that point, in your experience, how does using humor help challenge and further that conversation around the stigmas and breaking down those stigmas with psychedelics and plant medicine?
Well, that's a really good question. That I think when I started my psychedelic show, I did a 111 city tour back in 2016, and this came from like a very organic place of it was something that I kind of had in the back of my mind that like, ooh, one day maybe I'll do a show about psychedelics in my now nearly 20-year career. Even in the very first year I was doing I was doing stand up. I had some psychedelic jokes. If you feel like Googling, I think my second Conan O'Brien appearance, I fought tooth and nail to get like a very just goofy, benign mushroom joke on there back in like 2008 or something like that. And so I remember telling these jokes on stage, and like you could kind of get away with the like goofy, in the same way that Cheech and Chong would get away with like, whoa, look at these guys smoking weed and doing something stupid. And I felt like if one to do more than say 5 minutes of material about psychedelics in say an hour-long headlining set, where you would start like 5 minutes would go okay. After that, people are starting to raise eyebrows. 10 minutes of psychedelic material, and people are like, what is this druggy that we're talking to? And so for me at that time, I always liked pushing up against any kind of stigma or anything that I saw. So it was really fun and funny and meaningful and fulfilling to kind of push those buttons that I think probably shouldn't have ever really been there. And then I always had this kind of dream of one day doing a psychedelic show. Once I had like enough fans that I could just lose half of them, ruining my career with a show about psychedelics. That's what I thought like 15 years ago or so. And so by the time I got around to actually doing a psychedelic show, it was something that it was exceptionally meaningful and fulfilling to me to bring present actually interesting, meaningful, maybe sciencey, maybe mental health type ideas, and frame them in a funny way that would get people thinking about psychedelics in a different way than, say, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas or something like that. And I got to meet the psychedelic community and a lot of great people and everything. And so I think that using humor to break down any stigma is something that is really valuable. But if you ask me now, like tonight, why am I going to the Bourbon Theater in Lincoln, Nebraska to do this psychedelic comedy show? I got to remind myself sometimes. The meaning gets lost on me after a while. Sometimes it's like my current show I have a live VJ who is providing real time visuals to what I'm saying. And so on this tour, I'm much more passionate about just kind of innovating a new type of show that blends psychedelic art and uses it as a way to articulate the experiences in a more accurate and creative way, more than it is about like, everyone needs to be aware that, like, at this point that kind of stuff would be sort of preaching to the choir for my audience that's coming out to this show.
As a psychedelic tour veteran now, with all that, what was one of the most, unexpected audience reactions you've gotten, or anybody coming up to you after the show? What really surprised you when you started having these conversations with the audience?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that a thing that surprised me immediately was that anyone cared. I just happened to tell a psychedelic story on Pete Holmes' podcast, You Made It Weird, back in like 2014, 2015. At the time, he's one of the, biggest fish in the small podcast pond. And I wasn't going on there to tell that story or anything. It just came up organically. And to my surprise, I got messages left and right with people more interested in hearing about like this DMT stuff or whatever I was talking about. So I was initially just, especially with something like DMT and the experiences that I had and the stories that I've shared, I thought people are just going to think that I'm making this up or that I'm crazy. And in fact, it's sometimes just the opposite. Like, where I'll be like, I don't know, maybe I'm just making up the memory of that. People be like, nope, that's what really happened to you. You really have a purple interdimensional girlfriend in hyperspace. And I'm like, I don't know, it could just be the way the brain consolidates memories and blah 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 and all this. And so one of the big surprises is that people seem to believe psychedelic experiences even more than I do in some ways, and then so there wasn't as much stigma as I thought talking about it. Two, that even someone like myself who was like thought all the stigma was ridiculous, I found out that I actually still had stereotypes of the psychedelic community in my own mind, and everything's if you're a Burning Man, there's certain things that you might be able to predict or whatever. But I kind of thought when I first started doing the shows, one, I was shocked that anyone showed up. I wasn't in the psychedelic community at all, so that was a surprise. And then two was a surprise that there's always like a table of like burnout, dreaded tie-dye. I see you're wearing a bit of tie-dye right now. This isn't to insult anyone. I'm just saying, like, with a show like mine, I was even expecting to see a bit more of that, and certainly I think most people that show up are. And so just to see how normal, whatever that is, the audiences that come out to this show are, how intelligent and thoughtful and polite, and what, like, interested, incredible listeners, and fun, and I mean they really are. Just the audiences that I get for this show are really just a pretty nice Venn diagram intersection of a lot of fun, but not too drunk and rowdy or out of control or something like that. Smart, but not pretentious, and alternative and creative, but too not too like wow bro all the time. And there's a mix of a little bit of that. And then I'd say the last thing that surprised me was how many people come to my show. Most of them are brought by friends of theirs that have been uh, uh, on their soapbox themselves about psychedelics, and their friends or family members don't are still kind of raising eyebrows or whatever, and so they'll bring them into my show. So there's actually, I would say, a surprising number of people that come out to a psychedelic comedy show that have never done psychedelics before. So a lot of surprises.
The psychedelic community is very diverse. We do have the dreadhead tie-dye guys, and we have the scientists who won't touch those guys with a 10-foot pole. What is that line that we as a publication and yourself have to walk between the seriousness and medicinal benefits of psychedelics versus the humor and culture that's already part of the psychedelic community?
I mean, I think anyone as an individual can go like, what do I got going on, and how could I like maybe balance myself out a little bit, and take on a little more of the point of view or understanding of the other side of things. Because I guess, and I'd almost even scrap what I just said, because I don't like being prescriptive or tell people how to live their lives or anything like that. But I think that what I'm trying to say is it's a difficult question to answer, because every single person needs to hear a different piece of advice depending on I go around trying to get psychedelic users more interested in science, and psychedelics are like a really great way to kind of a fun little hook to draw people in, to get them thinking about consciousness and perception and these ideas that I think are potentially more fascinating and potentially more useful and meaningful in people's lives. That's my own bias. But then I also go into academia, and I try to like tell people like, hey, maybe there's a little too much stigma. Maybe things are a little too buttoned up in here. Maybe some of this clinical research is a little too sterile or whatever. So it depends on where you are. Some people need to hear that they need to take a few more baths. Some people need to hear that, maybe they got to loosen up some of the OCD.
Exactly. Well, this is something you touched on in the documentary you helped make, Psychonautics. Could you talk about that experience and, coming from a stand-up world, what made you want to actually help produce this documentary, and, your thoughts on the documentary format?
Well, yeah, I'm glad you asked. I mean, obviously, I can tell you that I really enjoyed the process of it. And as proof, I was just emailing, coincidentally enough, probably an hour before I jumped on here. I was emailing the producer and director of the documentary Psychonautics, a comics exploration of psychedelics, free on Amazon Prime. And see how smooth that was?
That was beautiful.
And I told them, hey, let's have a meeting next week. I'm interested in another documentary. I actually have several ideas, and I hate to bum anyone out, but probably my next one won't be about psychedelics. But anyway, the documentary came about because I did the psychedelic show. It stocked me the number of people came out. I figured out, tweaked some of the marketing, the audiences grew. I got on a couple podcasts. The audiences grew. This isn't like massive theaters or anything, but even just to be selling out like a 200-300 seat venue, predictably, with a show about psychedelics was something that caught me off guard back in 2015. And so I was like, hell, well, I'll put together a big tour. Did that. So put together a big, started with 50 cities and then ended up being 111 cities. And then, it's kind of like a, if you build it, they will come, fingers crossing sort of thing. So I put together all these things, and then I do the whole big podcast run and get on all these big podcasts at the time promoting the tour. Mark Maron was one of the podcasts that I was on, his WTF show, and this producer, Matt Schuler, who generally makes comedy documentaries, or not documentaries, comedy specials for people, had always wanted to do maybe something scripted and got a hold of me. He thought my conversation was interesting, and he got a hold of me and wanted to potentially make like a scripted short or something like that. He was just like, look, I have like $20,000-$30,000 I want to like blow on like making a small dream of mine come true, and your voice is or your perspective is interesting, and would you be interested in something? And I was like, I'm not closed-minded about scripted stuff, but I've always had various documentary ideas, and that's something that I've always thought interested me. And so we explored a lot of different documentary ideas. Most of them were science. It had nothing at all to do with psychedelics, even though I was touring with the psychedelic show at the time. And then I was like, it's too bad you didn't get a hold of me earlier, because I'm going to this weird psychedelic science conference, this MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelics Studies. They have a once every 4-year conference. It happens to be in a couple months in April. This is 2017. And like it's gonna have like the who's who there. I'm doing this comedy gala, and there'll be some other people, and like, boy, it's too bad we didn't think of this earlier, because it'd be fun to shoot a bunch of stuff there. And then we were just like, you know what, screw it, let's do it. And even raised and got some more of a budget together too, and we simply just went to the conference. The hotel that they put me up in, I just turned the room into a film studio, or rather the director Brian Bellenkoff did. And so people could just jump on, and we could just grab people. They could jump on the elevator. We interview them for 30 minutes and got all these great interviews with all these great people, and over the weekend, and got to see the wild scene that is a psychedelic science conference. I've been to other science conferences, and psychedelic science conferences are a very different kind of science conference. That's for sure. And so we shot all this. The amazing amount of incredible footage that ended up on the cutting room floor, of course. But we shot all that, and then we were just too busy to think about it. We didn't know what the documentary was. We just invested a bunch of time and energy into that, and now the producer's like looking to like, okay, now we have like maybe 6 months to worth of funds to shoot some more stuff and edit this thing and start submitting it to festivals and stuff like that. And so we didn't really know what to do. So I was just like, well, let's just shoot me doing some psychedelics and having some experiences. Shot that. We also happened to like record a couple of my stand-up shows. So like maybe we'll splice in a little bit of the stand-up here and there. I was actually against showing my stand-up originally until I saw the way that that Brian was putting it in together, and then the ultimate end product turned out to be this. I inadvertently had a mental break while shooting the documentary, which was a combination of the pressure of doing something new and high stakes and a lot of other things going on in my life, and doing more psychedelics than usual, and so it all kind of turned out perfectly. It's not like there's nothing that I would change, and I even don't even. I mean, the documentary, like, people seem to like it. I don't think it's it's not really making any lists or anything like that, but it's something that ultimately, especially for a first documentary, it had this really nice blend of comedy and personal and information, and it was such an awesome process. And I would absolutely, I would actually, I mean, my dream is to do like a docu-series. And it's part of why I started my science podcast, Here We Are, where in my travels I would tour around and interview, look up universities, be like, oh, that seems interesting. A lot of like how the brain works type stuff. And so when I started that podcast 10 years ago, it was always in my head that I would do this like Mike Rowe dirty jobs of academia type thing, that like I'm not looking for like best-selling authors or these science popularizers. I'm looking for people that are actually doing the like nuts and bolts, grinding it out each day in a lab, not ever getting any credit or public attention for it or whatever. That's something that really fueled me, and it's still, that's to this day, something like that is something that I'm interested. So that's how that all came about. And at the end of the day, there are few bits of my work that I can look back on that make me cringe less than that documentary. Still makes me cringe because I cannot stand seeing myself or hearing my own voice or anything else. But that's my own issues to work through.
I think most performers, feel that. Even myself, I edit a lot of video and hate. Once I'm done editing, I'm like, I never want to look at that again. Don't show it to me.
Yeah.
As part of the Here We Are podcast, what was one of the most mind-bending or profound people you talked to, or a conversation that really enlightened you in a new way?
Well, that's a pretty easy one. Let's do a couple, just depending on when this comes out. A recent one before I put the show on hiatus to put this show and tour together, and now we're relaunching. Either at the end of the year or the first week in the new year. But one of the ones was Henry G. The brief history of life on Earth. I actually use some of the concepts that I looked from that I learned from his book in some large chunks of the Psychedelic show, and it's just boiling down the evolution of how life got to be here and maybe where it's going, in 12 pithy chapters, as the subtitle says, and senior editor of Science, or of Nature rather, the exceptionally prestigious Nature magazine, and so he really knows his stuff. My favorite scientist in the planet is Robert Sapolsky, and that's who I'm relaunching the episode. We were supposed to record a couple days ago, and we both ended up having to reschedule. But a few days from now, I will be. I'm trying to get through his new book, Determined, the Science of Living Without Free Will, I believe is the subtitle of it. And it's a joy to read, but it's just not every page I have some new idea, and I have to stop and write and journal a little bit and chew on it. And he's he's one of my favorite scientists and one of my favorite science communicators, and honestly, just one of my favorite human beings on planet Earth. And he's funny. He's funnier than most comedians you'd ever meet, and so I really like his stuff. He's a neuroscientist and primatologist, and so his first popular book was Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, which is all about the stress response system. This was 30 years ago. So the ideas that you now hear today of like, oh, well, we have this old mammalian stress response system that every mammal has that is kind of inappropriate for our modern world, where a lion is chasing a zebra, and both the lion and the zebra are releasing glucocorticoids, which is delegating energy away from unnecessary kind of longer, less pressing projects like digestion or memory or the immune system. Empowering, this is no time for a sex drive. You don't need a boner right now, and you're powering the energy to the legs and muscles to get the hell out of there, to catch that prey or whatever. And then afterwards, most mammals, once they escape or whatever, it comes to some sort of ending. The parasympathetic response system dials everything back down into this lovely homeostasis that we all hear about in middle school, and in our humans, with their ability to think so far in the future, mixed with some peculiarities of our modern world that evolution kind of never saw coming, nor did it build us for, makes it so that it's very hard for us to turn off that chronic stress response system. And generally we're activating that same response that's meant for escaping being eaten by a bear. Instead, is now something that we're thinking about when we're in traffic, or thinking about our financial situation or our 401ks or something like that. So I'm happy to see these ideas are getting more and more popular. I would say that I'm a bit of a Sapolsky hipster, but he was the one that kind of forwarded those ideas 30 years ago. So people are now becoming pretty familiar with some of those concepts that he dedicated much of his early career to. So yeah, but I'm very much into how did evolution shape the mind? What for? What does that say about our conscious experience, our perceptions, and our biases? I love cognitive biases, and so those are my big interests, which leads to having to learn about animal behavior and biology and every damn thing.
Very cool. I think, with the intake of psychedelics, that's really going to change our brain chemistry and how we evolve moving forward in managing all this.
You think so?
I know so. I think just the interaction of mushrooms and the more we ingest and pass that along through our DNA and our children, I think will have a profound effect in generations to come.
Yeah, I mean, I've given up on making predictions about anything in life, but
well, there's the famous stoned ape theory, right? It was these apes that ate some magic mushrooms, and the visualizations helped them, perceive things differently. And take us to where we are now.
Yeah, I mean, I would be a hair surprised if there was a lick of truth to any of that, but I mean, I guess it would be difficult to say, but the mechanisms to make that happen seem a little far-fetched. But I love the idea, and I sure hope that it's true. It's sure a fun story. I think that certainly, there is evolved plasticity in the brain. That is, like, for example, the reason why our, say, prefrontal cortex, the fanciest part of the human brain, the stuff that really kind of sets us apart and a lot of impulse control and decision making and executive functioning, and this stuff that we care so much about and are always trying to like will more of that energy, and the stuff that depletes really easily. It's one of the last things to mature in the human brain. It doesn't fully mature until about the age of 25. And that has nothing to do with whether it could mature or not. It's
Right.
actually evolution has selected for people whose prefrontal cortex matures later than the actual like nuts and bolts neurons could have. There's no reason why the neurons and everything else couldn't mature, easily 10 years earlier or more. And it probably says quite a lot about, and those are some of those years you start going off on your own and stuff, and it probably says quite a lot about needing flexibility in that kind of taking in some of the whatever the cultural values are, and being adaptable during those years. And I think in a world that is, and then we lose a little bit of that plasticity. So in a modern world that seems to be mismatched with our evolved brains, which evolution is a slower process than we can
Right.
hope to take much advantage of in any meaningful way anytime soon. But I do think that that it definitely creates. I think psychedelics do create an opportunity to enhance that plasticity and creativity in a world that changes so incredibly fast. My grandpa is 89. I just went to visit him a few days ago. He's like sort of kind of, he's like on his way out and kind of cognitively still very much together. And he is just like every old guy, like, oh, the world's changed so much and this and that. But I certainly think that in his case, I think that someone who is about 90 years old now has seen the world change so unfathomably, but compared to what the change his grandfather would have seen, it may have seemed just as significant. But you're talking about like a little bit of some efficiencies in wheels or irrigation or something like that happening over the course of 50 to 100 years through much of human history, whereas now there's seemingly life-changing innovations of like, oh, not only do we have this chat GPT, but that like was kind of people started using more. When was it released? I don't know, 6 months ago or something, or earlier this year. And now it's like, if you aren't using this, you're falling. This thing that basically didn't exist a year ago. Now, if you aren't using it, like you may not survive in your career.
How strict? I just want to say, how strict are you with your psychedelic regimen? How often do you take them? Are you on a microdosing routine, or what's your current kind of regimen with that?
I've never had a lot of luck with microdosing. I haven't given it too serious of a shot. I do like to more like I like small doses of DMT, but I'm certainly perceiving the change. So if I'm going to do a little bit of something, it's usually that it's tough to say because it was pretty regularly much of my life, I guess. I've been doing psychedelics for 27 years, and then really kind of came to a head around the time that I did my documentary. And, you know, when you're writing shows about psychedelics and everything, there's just a little bit more, there's a little more of a excuse and reason, and there's like a little more kind of intrinsic pressure to have more psychedelic, or certainly like, you know, a lot of people simply don't have the time to have like a 12-hour acid trip very regularly, whereas I can easily go like, well, that's just my work day. I'm gonna put in 12 hours a day in the office today, and by that I mean tripping my balls off and trying to talk into a voice recorder and hoping that a few insights and jokes that will ultimately entertain audiences and be more money in my pocket. And you know, so but then I had a mental break. I had my first severe manic episode during the filming of Psychonautics, ended up in a psych ward. That'll make a person a little skittish. But I probably tried to get back on the horse a little too soon after that. And so now I'm just a little more touch and go. So it depends. Like ketamine, I'll pretty much, I shouldn't even say that, because like ketamine I will do as often as I can get it in my system, but I don't like snorting ketamine.
Right, that's a little.
I love snorting ketamine. It's just that I have some sort of allergic response to it or something where now just one day I like broke my, I thought like my nose was going to collapse or some shit. I was on a little bit of a run with it. And honestly, I'm not even saying that like I had I was happy with what I was doing. I was having a nice time exploring, but I guess using as much as I was, just one day I had like this. Now my sinuses, I'll basically have like a mild to severe cold for 5 to 10 days if I snort ketamine. And day 5 of blowing your nose, you're going, no ketamine experience is worth that, you know. And so
right.
And then things like you know, IM and stuff like that is all, it just, there's just a lot more like barriers there. So that's one that I'll do willy-nilly. I can tell you that I have my eyes on a mushroom trip for about a week from now. But it's been like a few months. Mushrooms were my all-time favorite psychedelic. They're just like nothing but good in my life until I had a manic episode, and now I'm skittish about it launching me into mania. So I won't do mushrooms if I'm already in a good place. If I'm depressed or like needing some sort of a shake-up or something like that, I'm a little more comfortable. But if I'm already in like if I'm already in a good elevated mood, a mushroom trip now, it's one of the sad things about being bipolar 1 is that I already would say that I was never overly happy person, nor do I think it's necessarily the goal of life to be happy. But one of the depressing things about having severe manic episodes like I have now had is, and I was bipolar 2 before psychedelics triggered the 1, is that now I can't be happy without being suspicious. Like I have to monitor and question my own, like, oh, be careful, don't get too happy, don't get feeling too good. And so it's a strange you know thing that I have to. So I used to do mushrooms far more willy-nilly. DMT, I went on a real tear with for a while there. And I just started doing DMT again a little bit this summer, but it had been since 2017 since I'd done it, and really 2016. So I kind of hit a point in DMT when it's just getting too weird, and I felt like I got everything I was going to get out of it. 5-MAO is something that I'm very interested in exploring more, and I have a nice device that's like one smooth hit of exactly the measured amount that I want and everything, and so I'm very interested in exploring it more, but I want to be in better shape because I feel like I'm having a fucking heart attack every time, and so I'll fuck around with nitrous pretty willy-nilly. Is this answering your question?
Absolutely. It's a perfect
anyway,
answer.
I don't like MDMA that much. I like MDA, but I haven't done it in a while. Oh, 2CB. I need to get my hands on some more 2CB and do. That's where I'm at right now.
Did you ever think you'd see the day with these DMT pens and a lot of these brandings with the mushroom gummies and chocolates? You know what?
No.
What's your gonna? Good answer. No.
Absolutely not. I mean, I didn't think that marijuana would ever be like decrim. I assumed when I first, so 27 years ago, it was 1996 when I first smoked weed for the first time, and when I first did mushrooms for the first time, and LSD for the first time. All of those were absolutely wonderful and life-changing, and I was a fucking miserable, and it didn't make me like not miserable. It just helped the misery quite a bit. And I just, man, I never thought, I figured it would just get harder. I just figured that the DEA would just keep putting more resources and there'd be more. I didn't see things loosening up in the way that they did, but you know, I think it was a bit of silver lining kind of luck. I think things like I think America was privileged enough to create a war on drugs, and so because they just didn't have enough of their own problems. Like I have like a very wealthy aunt who like just married some rich guy who also never worked for his money, and she's the most dramatic person you'll ever meet. Like everything's oh my god, and like she doesn't work, she's never had a problem. But if you talk to her, it sounds like she has way more problems than anyone else you'd ever. And it's like, you know, I got to get to this student PTA meeting or some bullshit that she volunteered for because she has too much time on her hands. And so I think America, it was like a little like that, you know, like in such a privileged position to you know, try to crack down on something like psychedelics and marijuana, which is like, you know, 9/11 happened. That changed things. People didn't, I mean, you couldn't go flying around with weed gummies or anything. Like now I forget that I have drugs in my bag all the time, and I'll get to a destination and be like, oh my God, I had the 20-year prison sentence in my backpack. And this is not to say listeners feel comfortable doing that at all. I'm not just saying that as a disclaimer. I'm saying that it's just like decent sense. But you know, the deprioritized of like searching for bombs, and things like that, and then like and COVID, you know, COVID created the most talk about mental health amongst the most diverse groups of people, and I guess by diverse I mean more. I mean actually like more the non-diverse, more the like straight-laced, like middle class white people that I grew up around, that like always, mental health was the stigma, like you weren't tough or something like
Right.
that. And so that, plus just like getting spread thin with resources when there were all sorts of ways in which a global pandemic can go wrong. And so to have that kind of deprioritize the war on drugs too has just created this really interesting environment where I'm shocked to see people as cavalier as they are. I have my own brand of stuff that's legal, my Purple Lady, which is supposed to launch December 1st, but endless delays. Who knew starting a drug company would be a lot of work? It just seemed like a fun idea. And working with like things like Amanita muscaria and blue lotus and just some stuff like that. That's only illegal in Louisiana, which is hilarious. Where it's like you can get a drive-through margarita in Louisiana, and I have, but they have some of the strictest drug laws that there are, and so no, never in a zillion years did I see access being what it is. I was just talking to some 25-year-old young kid. Maybe I'll just say his name. This podcast is Soul of Jarrett. And this, kind of great guy, lovely guy, and he's like kind of this cliche, crunchy hippie type, and fun, lovely fella, and he is like, he's 25, and he's telling me this story of getting pulled over in Texas with a car full of drugs, just like all sorts of mushrooms and weed and everything else. And they didn't even, they put him in jail for like an hour. He was like, and he's telling me the story. He's like, I was worried I was going to be in there all night. That's why he was worried he was going to be in jail all night for a car full of drugs. Like, dude, that's 20 years. It's 20. Like, if they would, and instead they just like, they took his weed. I think they even let him keep his fucking microdoses of psilocybin. This is, I mean, insane. I was in Dallas, Texas. I actually go through Texas quite a bit. I perform. That's another thing that surprises people. Your question earlier, what surprises people about my show? And one, people assume that I'm going to all like the cliche, like Portland, LA, Austin, Asheville, whatever. And I do those, but I do as many of the like. I like going to places that are underrepresented. Like I have at the time that we're talking, or when is this coming out?
It'll be early next week.
Early next week. So yeah, I have like Springfield, Missouri, St. Louis, Missouri. I have like Louisville. We just added 2 shows because the first one sold out so fast, and Lexington. And I like going to places where, like, there's plenty of people there interested, but they don't get like, the flaming lips aren't going through their town ever or as much as they would like, that sort of thing. They don't get to see, everyone can like look up Alex Gray's art, online, but there's maybe not as many like local psychedelic artists or or venues where you can view that art being displayed. And those are some of my favorite areas to go to. So anyhow, I was in Dallas just doing a regular club just 10 years ago when marijuana was opening up and everything. And this was someone that got pulled over, and he had half a joint in his ashtray, and they took him to jail. He was on the show. They took him to jail. He spent like a week in jail for like half of a joint, and we were telling the cop too, like, man, this is like wrong side of history stuff. Like, this is like the way the world's going. This, you know. And they're like, oh, not here, not in Texas. Well, 10 years later, you're letting some dopey 25-year-old off the hook with a 20-year sentence worth of drugs in his car.
Exactly. Times are changing for the better, thanks to trailblazers like yourself.
Oh, thank you.
What would you say? Do you recommend a proper dosage for coming to a show of yours, or do people usually show up stoned, or what's?
I would prefer they didn't, actually, and I'm not saying that as like a disclaimer or anything. Mm-hmm. I just think that, like, look, I don't tell people how to live their lives, and if you're like a more advanced user or something like that, and you're like, maybe I'll have like a gram or something like that, or better yet, like a microdose, or of course, like, a couple puffs of weed or something, something chill. But stand up takes an attention span, and at least the way that I trip, I mean, I guess my documentary is called Psychonautics because it represents kind of my way in using psychedelics, is that I tend to take very large doses, and I prefer to like often be by myself. I prefer to be like laid out on a couch, maybe like listening to some music or whatever. My show is like pretty trippy in and of itself, with all the visuals and everything. It's also a little more cerebral than your average stand-up comedy too, and so honestly, I mean, it's why I started this company, was so because Amanita Muscaria and Blue Lotus, and the way that we're making them, especially, I'm on a bit of a Blue Lotus kick right now. It's something that's like very nuanced, exceptionally nuanced, so that because people are always like, is there going to be drugs there? Oh, should I trip? And I was like, fuck, it's so problematic because some noob, it happens once in a while that some noob is like, well, I've never done mushrooms before, but if ever I was going to try, I should gobble 5 grams and go to this psychedelic comedy show. Whoopsie daisies. And then I open up the show by mocking that very decision. Whoa. Like that's not how you want your first trip to be. So like, I do everything in my power. And I mean, I have lots of, there's things that our team's looking forward to implement, which is like video messages from me. Like when you buy a ticket, your receipt comes with a message that's thanking you, but like telling you like, here's how to like optimize this experience, which is like, it's funny. Most people, when they're going to trip, they have like this whole set and setting. And I have this for not tripping. Here's how to not trip at my show and enjoy the trip that is my experience. So yeah, I do not like the idea of people tripping at my show. I don't care, and I don't tell people how to live their lives, but like, why? Like, why wouldn't you rather just like space out if you're tripping? Whereas if you come to my show and it can actually pay attention, it'll be like kind of trippy in and of itself, and hopefully it will enhance future experiences. And the next time you are tripping, you'll remember some of those lines or some of the takeaways from the show, and you'll have better time, better experiences thereafter.
Beautiful, Shane. We've been chatting here for an hour. I don't want to take up much more of your time. Rattle off some upcoming tour dates. Where can people follow you and learn more? When are your Amanita and Blue Lotus products coming out, and how can people stay in touch?
We were sure hoping to have them out by Christmas. We might still get them out just in time. Right now, there's like a makeshift crap mypurplelady.com website that hopefully by the time you're listening, it's actually the real website that we're going to use with the real art and everything. We just slapped something up months ago as a placeholder, but I do have the part of the problem is I've still been beta testing, so I'm selling the products at shows, and so we've made some last minute changes with some of the flavors, with some of the, it's like once you're considering the flavor, you know, it's pretty close to finished because the it's so funny. That's like I'll have all these like things at my table that are like novel experiences for people. As far as I know, these, or as far as anyone coming to my show knows, these are like fucking DMT gummies that are the most powerful thing anyone's ever put in their, you know, I try to explain, but like people don't fucking listen to and you know, you'd think you'd want more information about what it's going to do. People will be like, what's your favorite flavor? Flavor? You care about the fucking flavor? But anyhow, we're finishing a few things like that. So mypurplelady.com for that, and then there's my tour. By the time people are listening, kind of starting next year, I'll be in the Southeast. We'll be posting a lot more of these dates soon, but I'll be spending about a month in Florida. I go based on weather, and then I have a Sprinter van and stay in Airbnbs and grain mills like this everywhere I go, and then I go all around, all through the South coast. I'll end up in California by end of March or April or so, and then I'll start going up the West Coast, be up there by May or so, and then go all the way across the north and spend all of summer across the north part. And then I'll start zigzagging down through fall, spring, kind of around like the middle of the country. So I go absolutely everywhere, and we're making 2 runs of this show. I've done almost half the country already on the first run, so we have a whole other run and a half left. It'll be about a 1.5 year tour. I'll be making a couple specials in the next year, but please go to psychonautics.com to check out my documentary, and shanemauss.com to check out all of the things that I do. And my podcast is called Here We Are.
Beautiful, Shane. Super appreciate your time here. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.